The Food of the Gods is the tale of Jack the Giant Killer, told from the point of view of the giant. This has not, I think, been done before in literature, but I have little doubt that the psychological substance of it existed in fact. I have little doubts that the giant whom Jack killed did regard himself as the Superman. It is likely enough that he considered Jack a narrow and parochial person who wished to frustrate a great forward movement of the life force. If, as not unfrequently was the case, he happened to have two heads, he would point out the elementary maxim which declares them to be better than one. He would enlarge on the subtle modernity of such an equipment, enabling a giant to look at a subject from two points of view, or to correct himself with promptitude. But Jack was the champion of the enduring human standards, of the principle of one man, one head, and one man, one conscience, of the single head, and the single heart, and the single eye. Jack was quite unimpressed by the question of whether the giant was a particularly gigantic giant. All he wished to know was whether he was a good giant, that is, a giant who was any good to us. What were the giant's religious views? What his views on politics and the duties of the citizen? Was he fond of children, or fond of them only in a dark and sinister sense? To use a fine phrase for emotional sanity, was his heart in the right place? Jack had sometimes to cut him up with a sword in order to find out. The old and correct story of Jack the Giant Killer is simply the whole story of man. If it were understood, we should need no Bibles or histories. But the modern world in particular does not seem to understand it at all. The modern world, like Mr. Wells, is on the side of the giants, the safest place, and therefore the meanest and the most prosaic. The modern world, when it praises its little Caesars, talks of being strong and brave, but it does not seem to see the eternal paradox involved in the conjunction of these ideas. The strong cannot be brave, only the weak can be brave, and yet again, in practice, only those who can be brave can be trusted, in time of doubt, to be strong. The only way in which a giant could really keep himself in training against the inevitable Jack would be by continually fighting other giants 10 times as big as himself. That is, by ceasing to be a giant and becoming a Jack. Thus, that sympathy with the small or the defeated as such, with which we liberals and nationalists have been often reproached, is not a useless sentimentalism at all, as Mr. Wells and his friends fancy. It is the first law of practical courage. To be in the weakest camp is to be in the strongest school. Nor can I imagine anything that would do humanity better than the advent of a race of supermen, for them to fight like dragons. If the Superman is better than we, of course we need not fight him, but in that case, why not call him the Saint? But if he is merely stronger, whether physically, mentally, or morally stronger, I do not care a farthing, then he ought to have to reckon with us, at least for all the strength we have. If we are weaker than he, that is no reason why we should be weaker than ourselves. If we are not tall enough to touch the giant's knees, that is no reason why we should become shorter by falling on our own. But that is at bottom the meaning of all modern hero worship and celebration of the strong man, the Caesar, the Superman. That he may be something more than man, we must be something less.